Here's our big fancy intro. It's big and it's fancy and it's our intro. Please enjoy.
Matt and Sean's new shop, day one.
Now, even though this is day one in the shop, this process started well before today.
Beat that.
The purchase of the brake press was a little bit of an impulse. When the auction price was $2,000, we thought it was a great deal. Then we figured out it was 30,000 pounds of metal we had to ship from California to Arizona, and shipping costs and all the other nonsense that went along quickly added up to about $8,000. Now, in moving the brake press, we used three different pieces of equipment. To move it, we used a heavy truck recovery vehicle, we used the crane, and we used a forklift. The crane was the slowest, most inconvenient, and most expensive. The truck was probably the cheapest, and it was comparable to the forklift, but the forklift was the most convenient. Engine hoists also make nifty little cranes, which we use to move this cool welder that we got in and out of the back of the truck. So sure, when you buy a piece of equipment in auction, you get a good price, but you're also buying all of the other issues, transportation problems that you never know about until they come up after you've already installed it. And we're going to have some future videos on that where we are doing changes to the wiring, we're replacing the motor, we replaced the flywheel bearings and seal on the gearbox. And then with any piece of equipment, you have to worry about tooling, and sometimes that's as much or more than the actual equipment itself. So when it's all said and done, we bought this $2,000 brake press, and we're about $12,000 into it now to have a good functioning, usable piece of equipment. When we buy things in auction, we like to stick with 10% of the current new MSRP of a similar piece of equipment because sometimes it's hard to know what something's worth. And if you're desperate, you're going to be spending more. If you're not, then you might be able to get it less. But 10% seems to be a good rule of thumb. Now, we're not real big in the bending world, but whenever we bring up that we have a lodge in Shipley to whether it's die makers or equipment repair people or other people that are familiar with the brake press world, and we say we have a lodge in Shipley, they're like, oh, that's a solid piece of equipment. And they are sometimes affectionately called large and shapely because they are just overbuilt for what it is, which kind of helps why they last so long. Lodge and Shipley, they're known for lathes, um, but this thing looks great. But with that being said, because the company was started in the 1800s and it went out of business in the 80s, there's not a lot of people that just work on these things. Parts aren't readily available. So when something goes wrong, you just take it apart. You try and figure things out. It's not easy. So if you're not somebody that wants to take things apart, fix things up, and figure out why it's not working, then I wouldn't recommend buying large equipment like this at auction, but going through some sort of distributor or reseller. Also, for this move, we used a company called Hunter Machine Moving, local to the Phoenix area. Family business, highly recommend them. You can see here they're very efficient, they're flexible, friendly. They're great to work with. Now, for those of you that know me, I always take on tasks thinking they'll be easy. In my head, they're really easy, but when you actually do it, it turns out it's a lot more complicated or involved or expensive than you originally anticipated, or at least I originally anticipated, which is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. The good thing is it ends up pushing you to do things that are a little bit out of your comfort zone, but it gets the job done and you figure it out. Just like buying this brake press, it was a little bit of an impulse. We thought it'd be easier, but in buying the brake press, it forced us into setting up the shop when we did. Otherwise, we probably would have drug our feet and everything else. So I think it was really great to get this thing going and pushing us over the edge. But there was a time when we were thinking about moving all this equipment ourselves with the skates and with the forklifts, but it turned out way more complicated than we thought it was going to be, and there's a lot of mystery and what ifs. So that's when we got these guys to come move it. And here you can see them taking the forklift and the bottle jack to lift it up to remove the skates. And that's what was needed because the brake press was so heavy and they couldn't get the large forklift inside the building. Our next piece of equipment that we're moving in is a vertical milling center by Haas. And when you're looking at milling centers, there's so many manufacturers, there's so many variations. So we went with a VF3, which is kind of like a bread and butter vertical milling center from Haas. They simplify things, they teach Haas in school, so it was a pretty no-brainer. This mill has a 15,000 RPM spindle, which is great for high-speed machining. It also has a pallet changer, which allows us to get into a little bit more production runs. The resell side of things, they had a vibration test, they did a ball bar test, and the spindle's good. The accuracy is, I believe it was within 1 to 2 thousandths of an inch. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. I believe the mill cost around $15,000, and I think after the shipping and the tooling and everything that goes along with it, I think there's, with used equipment, you still have to repair, replace, clean up things. I think we're in the mid 20s for out the door price. So to retouch on the accuracy, we're getting a little bit under 2 thousandths of an inch, and with the Haas, it's over 5 years. That's great. And this one is in its 20-year-old. But back then they built their machines with beefier components. The C frame was a little bit beefier. So for us, this was a great addition for capability, capacity, and accuracy. Hey, thanks for watching our day one install of our shop. If you have any questions, comments, leave it down below. We'll respond. If you want any more answers, or if you're starting up your own shop or want to, we'll be free to answer any and all questions that you may have. We look forward to making more videos on other issues and projects and whatever other experiences comes along.